Now to a developing story from Pennsylvania. An arrest has been made in a cold case murder of a little girl from back in the 70s.
David Vantra is, ladies and gentlemen, a monster. He is every parent's worst nightmare.
People were definitely afraid to let their kids out.
A man tried to kidnap Holly twice. It's a secret. I can't tell anyone.
This is a man who is a remorseless child predator.
It's shocking. I had no idea. They've just always been very nice people.
This man is evil. He killed this poor 8-year-old girl he knew and who trusted him, and then he acted as if he was their family friend.
Today, the pastor accused of killing an 8-year-old girl was brought back to Delaware County to face justice.
David Vantra's own statement that he gave to our friends at the state police. He got her in the car, drove her to a secure location, asked her to take off her clothes. She refused. He then ejaculated in front of her and beat her to death with his penis.
The year is 1975. The outdoors as we know it now wasn't as it was then in some parts of the world. Many communities were tight-knit and everyone held a sense of camaraderie. Still with their problems, yes, but crime and murder in certain communities wasn't a normal occurrence. In that time, serial killers were a budding concept on the rise. That couldn't be truer for the small town of Marple Township in Broomall, Pennsylvania. In that era for them, kids could run and play outdoors without fear of being targeted. The atrocities that have become the world were yet to sink their fangs into the life they knew. But on August 15, 1975, that would all change. The lives of everyone in the community would be warped forever.
Pre-August 1975, it was, Anytown, USA. Post that day, changed everything for the kids, for the parents, for the families, for everybody, because nobody could do anything anymore in the innocence that they used to do it.
It was meant to be a day of celebration. The Harrington family, Father Reverend Harold Boyd Harrington, Mother Ina Cover Harrington, siblings, Harriet Ann Myers, Zoe Harrington, and Gretchen Harrington were about to have one new member. Reports and witness recollections about the chain of events that led up to the impending tragedy of Gretchen Harrington's disappearance make her case even more sad. Everything was going well that morning. Excitement was in the air. Ina Harrington was coming home with their new sibling to join the family, little baby Jessica Harrington. The Harringtons' home was a God-fearing household, and it was the final week of Vacation Bible School at the Trinity Chapel, a Christian Reformed church at 144 Lawrence Road. The normal routine was simple. Gretchen's sisters, Anne and Zoe, would walk with her to the chapel. The girls would walk up the hill a few blocks to a traffic light and then cross busy Lawrence Road to the Bible school. But on the day when Gretchen was last seen, she was all alone. With the welcoming home of the baby, the routine changed. At around 9:20 a.m., Gretchen set out to the Trinity Chapel on her own. As the sun hovered above little Gretchen making her way to Bible school, her father watched her leave the house and walk up the hill in her blue sneakers. Reverend Harold Harrington would later reminisce on that day to a news reporter, lamenting what he found out to be the worst pain he had ever felt in his life. The day my wife came home from Bryn Mawr Hospital, Gretchen was murdered. Everyone was none the wiser about the danger lurking in the midst as Gretchen trekked along Lawrence Road, eyes pierced from a distance behind a steering wheel, trailing behind Gretchen as she approached the portion of Lawrence Road, running parallel to the 4-lane section of the highway. It was there that little Gretchen was last seen as she was abducted by an assailant or assailants in the vehicle. The minutes began ticking, and minutes can be the difference between life and death in these instances. In a 2006 child abduction murder study extended by the Attorney General's Office of Washington State based on cases they analyzed, one of the key findings states that in 76% of the missing children homicide cases studied, the child was dead within 3 hours of the abduction, and in 88.5% of the cases, the child was dead within 24 hours. In 2018, while speaking to ABC News, Dr. Brianna Fox, former FBI agent and criminology professor at the University of South Florida, told ABC News, "The first 48 hours are also critical because that's when investigators have the best chance of following up on leads before people's memories start to fade. The information that law enforcement gets tends to be a little more accurate, and they are able to act on the information and hopefully get that person who is missing quicker. As time goes on, there are fewer breadcrumbs to follow." But what the former FBI agent and criminology professor said next is what showed the severity of the case with Gretchen Harrington. According to her experience in the field and wealth of knowledge in criminology, investigations on missing persons who authorities believe may be vulnerable, such as children and those with a mental illness, are expedited because time is of the essence to get the word out to the public to look for them. Children are usually murdered quickly, sometimes within the first 3 hours, but usually within the first 2 days. This paints just how crucial the next few hours were to Gretchen's survival. People usually see something, so that period of time is absolutely vital in order to find the person right away. The problem was, would anyone notice Gretchen missing soon enough to alert authorities and the family, to have eyes on the hunt for her? Gretchen was in the wind, hopefully with her heart still beating. Reverend David Zanstra, at the time much younger, was the pastor of Trinity Chapel. According to police reports, he was the first one to realize 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington was missing. No one even thought to question it then, as he was a dear family friend, Gretchen's father's close friend, and the pastor of the chapel. David Zanstra recalled he notified the police that Gretchen was missing after one of the Bible school teachers told him she was not in class. How he picked up her being missing was, according to him, during the transport of the kids. The first hour of the Bible school was conducted at Trinity Chapel before the kids, numbering about 60 and of various ages, were sent to the Reformed Presbyterian Church nearby. In an interview, Zanstra's own words were, "I was running a Volkswagen bus with a certain amount of children to bring them to the church building, and when I got there, I think one of the teachers from Gretchen's class asked me if I'd seen Gretchen. She said, 'I thought Gretchen might be with you,' and I said no. She said, 'She's not here.'" Reverend Zanstra continued his recollection of that day, further stating, "Either I called or I went to Pastor Harrington's house and they confirmed that she had left to walk up the street, and I said she's not here." Then Reverend Zanstra stated that it must have been at that point he called the police. Not remembering when you called the police in something so crucial could be seen as a red flag. But again, these times in their neighborhood were calm and reassuring, and Zanstra was the pastor, so there were no suspicions about anything he said. His wife, Margie Zanstra, also recalled her memories from the events that unfolded. According to her, she remembered Reverend Harold Harrington coming up to the church, frantic and in disarray, shouting the words, "She's gone, I know she's gone." Harold Harrington would later explain that he usually watched her walk up the street, but for that day, he only watched her a little bit, and then went into the house. It's unfortunate when the peace that you know becomes the reason your guard was dropped and the inexplicable happens. Whoever took Gretchen used that peaceful atmosphere of the town to their advantage and struck when the moment was right. The Harrington family was in a state of panic, fear and shock, understandably so. No one had any word of where their little adorable Gretchen disappeared to. Lieutenant Richard Mankins said in a 1988 interview that the killer lured Gretchen to a vehicle and grabbed her between 9:20 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. on the east side of Lawrence Road, between the Lawrence Court Apartments and Brighton Village Apartments. This was allegedly brought to their attention by an eyewitness who last saw Gretchen. That eyewitness was the mother of another Bible school student driving by who had dropped off her child. It was a rush to gather any evidence and information that could lead to rescuing this little girl with her entire life ahead of her. A missing person poster was released to the public in hopes of anyone having information that could do just that. During investigations, it was gathered that Gretchen got into the abductor's vehicle not by force, but willingly. This made the situation even more chilling because it meant her abductor was someone Gretchen knew and considered trustworthy. 24 hours passed, and 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington was nowhere to be found. 48 hours passed, and little Gretchen Harrington was still nowhere to be found. During those 2 days, it wasn't that nothing was being done, but just that nothing was panning out. Persons were coming forward with suspicious sightings of a little girl getting into a vehicle, but none led to the location or narrowing down where Gretchen was taken to. Police officers and those who were able to search scoured the region for any signs of Gretchen. The kids who grew up and played with Gretchen felt the urgency and tense atmosphere of the grown-ups, their innocent minds still unable to grasp the full extent of the emergency. Even when they knew Gretchen was gone, they didn't understand the gravity of the situation. They thought their friend would eventually come back, but even that innocence for them was snatched away when Gretchen's lifeless body was found in the woods on October 14, 1975, 1 day short of the 2-month mark since she disappeared.
Investigators say the little girl was walking from her Marple Township home to Bible school when she disappeared. Her body found weeks later in Ridley Creek State Park, but the mystery behind her death would last for decades.
In the Marple police case file, the haunting spot is highlighted on an aging visitor map of the park. The place where her remains were found was about 1.5 miles from West Chester Pike, a main thoroughfare in Philadelphia's suburbs. From descriptions in the book, Marple's Gretchen Harrington tragedy, kidnapping, murder and innocence, Lost in Suburban Philadelphia, written by Joanna Falcone Sullivan and co-author Mike Mathis, it states that a Marple Township police report from October 14, 1975, said dispatcher Sheila Bobb called the township police to notify them that Pennsylvania State Police had found human remains in the park and that their presence was requested at the scene. The remains were discovered some distance off Sandy Flash Drive in Ridley Creek State Park at about 4:45 p.m. by a Navy seaman, Andrew Lewis Van Dyke Jr., who said he visited the park frequently to hike. According to reports, the remains were skeletonized. Clothing that was found in a neat pile by the remains was tentatively identified as belonging to Gretchen. Little Gretchen Harrington's case now turned from a kidnapping to murder, and police officers wasted no time searching through the brushes where her body was found for any evidence and clues that would lead to apprehending the sick psychopath that took her life. One suspect became the focus of investigators. His name was Richard Bailey, a convicted sex offender who had a history of committing violent crimes against young girls. Bailey, who died in prison, has never been publicly connected to the case, nor has he ever been formally named as a suspect by police. But recent interviews with current and former Marple police officers and old police reports in the Harrington case file, including a police interview with a man who placed Bailey near Gretchen on Lawrence Road that fateful morning, all pointed to the convict as a likely culprit in the little girl's death. At the time of the Harrington kidnapping, Bailey was employed as a maintenance worker at the Park Lane East apartment complex on Garrett Road in Upper Darby. Documents show that on the day of the crime, sometime before noon, Bailey was at a tractor business on Sproul Road in Broomall, about a mile from where Gretchen disappeared, dropping off and picking up lawn equipment. The manager noted that Bailey was not the usual person from Park Lane to do those things, and that he seemed to be in a hurry. Bailey had access to a blue 1970 Chevrolet pickup truck that belonged to the apartment complex. Reports state that on March 4, 1976, the truck was taken to the crime lab for examination, and a dried weed typical of those found in the area where Gretchen's body was found was recovered. Police worked hard to find links between Bailey and Gretchen's disappearance, but there wasn't any physical evidence. However, among witnesses who seemed to place Bailey at the scene of the abduction was a man by the name of Carl Henry Williams, a 27-year-old parolee who was in Broomall the day Gretchen was abducted. In a 1977 interview, Williams, who was, in the past, hush about seeing Bailey on Lawrence Road the day Gretchen disappeared, told investigators he didn't say anything because he didn't want to cause trouble for himself. Williams's employer was unaware he was a parolee, and his job could be jeopardized if he found out. In his words, he told officers, "It's just that I figured I was just coming out of prison, and I didn't want people bugging me, coming where I work, because where I work they didn't know I was on parole and just out of prison." When asked how well he could see Bailey as the alleged suspect vehicle passed him on Lawrence Road, Williams responded, "I could see his whole face, left side anyway when he passed, and his head and his hair." Still, without physical evidence, authorities couldn't officially label Bailey as the perpetrator. Unearthed case files from January 2006 documented apparent statements that Bailey and Bailey's attorney had made, which implied an admission of guilt in the Harrington case. The trooper, who conducted an interview with Bailey in prison, stated that Bailey told him, "If I killed this girl, I must have been sick." The trooper later recounted a conversation with Bailey's attorney, during which the attorney said, "I heard that you were speaking with my client," and then stated a form of offer if Bailey pleaded guilty to this case. It's documented that the next morning, the trooper spoke to then District Attorney Judge Hazel, after which it was decided not to pursue the plea and to continue seeking additional forensic evidence. According to the trooper, there was no additional evidence. Based on information from the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, a 66-year-old Bailey was incarcerated at the State Correctional Institution at Laurel Highlands in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, when he died of natural causes at a hospital on November 4, 2013. Williams, who was a police officer in Marple Township from 1985 to 2018, said, "Unfortunately, I think the guy that died in prison a few years ago probably got away with it. The indicators were there, the time, location, space, opportunity was all there. But as far as forensically, if we had the tools we have today, maybe we'd have something. It just wasn't there at that time." And just like that, all leads to finding justice for Gretchen Harrington unfortunately went cold. The case would be picked up by fresh eyes over the years in an attempt to find justice, but no new evidence was able to bring closure to the haunting events hovering over the memories and hearts of the Harrington family and the township community. Approximately 48 years would pass, and the person who abducted and murdered 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington would remain a mystery. But justice has no expiration date, and after nearly 5 decades, justice came to collect its debt from the one responsible for taking the life of an innocent little child. The suspect had everyone in disbelief. He was closer than the family even thought all along. The definition of a snake in disguise and living a life as a cover-up for his sick and demented pleasures. Early 2023, the fire was still burning within the hearts of officers wanting justice for Gretchen, and it led the investigation to take a new turn. Reports state that authorities interviewed a witness, the best friend of David Zanstra's daughter, and the details she exposed showed how grotesque this suspect was. On January 2, 2023, investigators conducted an interview of the witness who was listed in official investigation documents as CI number 1 with initials SF. According to the obtained reports, CI number 1's best friend growing up was David Zanstra's daughter, Mara Zanstra, and attended the same school as the Harrington sisters. CI number 1 would often go to the Zanstra's house to play with Mara and for sleepovers. During the interview, CI number 1 recalled one night when she was 10 years old, she slept over at the Zanstra's. During sleepovers, CI number 1 would always sleep in the same double bed as Mara. On this occasion during the night, CI number 1 was awakened by Pastor David Zanstra touching her groin area. CI number 1 stated she shifted her body, so Zanstra immediately stopped and left the room. The documented report continued, stating that CI number 1 stayed the next night, wherein the same thing happened, as Zanstra again purposely touched her groin area. CI number 1 stated that she told his daughter, Mara, the next morning. This is where the interview got even more shocking. Upon telling his daughter about what her father did, on the 2 occasions she slept over at their home, Mara told CI number 1 that her father, Reverend David Zanstra, does that sometimes. It was what she said next that caused investigators' hearts to sink. Both with anger and sorrow for his daughters, Mara went on to tell CI number 1 that sometimes she can hear her sisters crying. This was a supposedly man of God who was behind closed doors a servant of the devil. After learning this and being touched twice at Zanstra's home, CI number 1 eventually told her parents what happened, and that resulted in that being the last night she ever slept over at the Zanstra's. The documented report further stated that CI number 1 also recalled that a girl in her class, Holly Shipley, was nearly kidnapped twice. So it seems David Zanstra was allegedly trying to carry out his twisted fantasies on little girls for a while before he got to innocent little Gretchen, who trusted him. CI number 1 brought a diary with her to the interview, which held details from September 15, 1975, stating that she believes David Zanstra was the one who murdered Gretchen Harrington.
48 years later, investigators say they were able to crack this case after a new witness came forward. With a diary entry from September 1975, she wrote after another child was almost kidnapped, writing, "A man tried to kidnap Holly twice. It's a secret, I can't tell anyone, but I think he might be the one who kidnapped Gretchen. I think it was Mr. Z."
With this new information within the palms of authorities, they were swift to act, making their way to Zanstra's home in Georgia. The retired pastor, now 84 years old, when confronted with the evidence against him, didn't fight, nor try to deny he was the culprit. It was the complete opposite.
Eugene Trey, he was relieved, I would say. It was like a weight was lifted off his shoulders. It was extraordinary to see. It was just, he was a different person. Even when he was told that he was going to be placed in arrest that day, he was okay with it. You know, he was just resigned to, this is my fate, I guess. And I don't know if he's sorry for what he did, but like I said, he just was a weight off his shoulders for sure.
Did he expect ever being arrested for this?
I doubt it, yeah.
For close to 5 decades, he kept that dirty secret to himself, while continuing to parade as a man who sought righteousness. Finally, his back was against the wall and admitted to his demons. This was a family friend, and he even presided over Gretchen Harrington's funeral. That's another level of twisted, to take the life of a little girl that considered you family, then pretend to search for her with the family, then go on to preside over her funeral, pretending to be a caring, concerned family friend and pastor. Justice found its way to his door, and justice, no matter how old, was going to be served, because hearing what he did to that little 8-year-old girl was enough to make anyone sick to their stomach. Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer, in a press conference about the case, shared the gruesome details David Zanstra confessed to doing to little Gretchen Harrington.
This poor young girl who lived on Lawrence Road, 27 Lawrence Road in Broomall, started walking towards the Trinity Chapel. She was met in a car by David Zanstra, who she knew because he was the reverend at the Bible camp she was going to, and she is the father of one of her best friends. So when he offered her a ride in his car, of course she got in the car. According to David Zanstra's own statement that he gave to our friends at the state police, he got her in the car, drove her to a secured location, asked her to take off her clothes. She refused. He then ejaculated in front of her and beat her to death with his hands. He then disposed of her body, went back to the Trinity Chapel Church, and tried to act like nothing had happened. In fact, he worked with his wife when Mr. Harrington called to find out what happened to his daughter to report this to police. This man is evil. He killed this poor 8-year-old girl he knew and who trusted him, and then he acted as if he was their family friend.
It was a long road. Many were haunted by Gretchen's murder. The community was never the same. The Harrington family was never the same, but the family finally had a part of their closure. The next was seeing this sexual deviant behind bars. David Zanstra was placed in cuffs and led away by authorities. Ahead of him, Zanstra is facing charges of homicide, murder, kidnapping of a minor, and possession of an instrument of crime. If convicted, it's safe to say he would deservingly spend the rest of his life behind bars. However, with his dark secrets coming to light, it begged the question, were other victims subject to his sick sense of pleasure? David Zanstra moved around as a pastor, so it's speculated other kids could have been sexually assaulted by the pedophile and murderer.
Right now, investigators are cross-referencing David Zanstra's DNA with evidence in other cases throughout the country. After 50 years without answers, now her family is getting closure. But other cases throughout the country are still unsolved, and detectives wonder if Zanstra could be responsible. He lived in California, Texas, and Georgia after Harrington's murder. Authorities are entering his DNA into a nationwide database that will alert them to any connections to evidence in those areas.
One cold case in question has gotten new focus, with Zanstra being investigated for any involvement. It is a 1991 California cold case that saw the disappearance of 4-year-old Amanda Nikki Campbell in the Bay Area.
It's a case that's been unsolved for over 30 years. Back in December of 1991, then 4-year-old Amanda Nikki Campbell vanished while riding her bike in Fairfield. It's a case ABC 7 News has been following ever since. Now, though, a possible new lead. The Fairfield Police Department saying they're following up on Campbell's case once again. The reason Fairfield police say they're re-examining this case isn't because of anything that happened here in the Bay Area. Instead, it's because of developments that happened thousands of miles away in Pennsylvania and Georgia. Those developments include the arrest of this man, 83-year-old David Zanstra. Investigators say Zanstra, who currently lives outside of Atlanta, recently admitted to killing an 8-year-old Pennsylvania girl back in 1975. After leaving Pennsylvania, he then moved here to California. From 1990 to 2005, he was the pastor of the Fairfield Christian Reformed Church, just a short drive from where Campbell went missing.
Everybody was scared, everybody was very protective of their children. Everybody, held them a little closer, a little tighter.
Fairfield police will be looking to see if Zanstra could have been involved in Campbell's case too.
Even with David Zanstra finally behind bars, the damage to the family and the community was done. The grief was immeasurable and was a weight on their hearts that came at the cost of their home and neighborhood never being the same again. Kids now grown recall their freedom to play outside without worry becoming a thing of the past. Parents got a lot more protective with them going anywhere. They were scared to death their child could be the next victim in the killer's sights. Paranoia plagued their minds. Some recall Reverend Harrington and his wife being afraid to let their girls outside again. Reverend Harrington underwent a change. Not only did he lose his little girl, but some speculated he was involved in her death. I can't imagine how much that played on his sanity. Eyewitnesses recall him looking drained, hair grayed. He was a different man. Gretchen's sister Ann Myers became an outcast at school because kids being young as they are didn't know what to say or how to address the elephant in the room. Myers was angry at life, angry at losing her sister, angry that her parents weren't her parents anymore. The tragedy followed her through her life, resulting in her being later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. When she became a parent, she had crippling fear and nervousness about her kids being out of sight, and panic attacks would set in. Enduring being hospitalized for depression and fighting through her grief, Myers slowly made headway in overcoming her traumatic past. Since his arrest in Georgia, where he stayed, David Zanstra has been fighting being extradited to Pennsylvania to face trial for his crimes. In September 2023, he lost that fight and was led away in cuffs to be extradited to Delaware County to face the law.
And we have an update on the cold case arrest that brought closure to a decades-old murder. Today, the pastor accused of killing an 8-year-old girl was brought back to Delaware County to face justice. NBC 10's Johnny Archer has the new developments.
On Thursday, David Zanstra extradited back to Delaware County from Georgia. The 83-year-old looking almost bewildered as media cameras captured state police escorting him in handcuffs as he faces charges in a murder that happened almost 5 decades ago.
As of November 8, 2023, David Zanstra was seen being led from a preliminary hearing in Middletown, where Magisterial District Court Judge Walter A. Stroll heard from 3 witnesses presented by Deputy District Attorney Jeff Payne, including the victim's sister, Zoe Harrington. David Zanstra's formal arraignment date is set for December 16, 2023 at the county courthouse in Media. He is being held without bail at the county jail in Concord. A lot of effort from numerous persons went into bringing this case to where it is now, some being the author Joanna Falcone Sullivan and co-author Mike Mathis, who wrote the book Marple's Gretchen Harrington Tragedy, which provided details close to the case that was one resource for this video. Being a part of the community when they were younger, they knew how much Gretchen's murder impacted everyone and conducted their own investigations and research for their book. It was this book that played a big role in breaking new lead on the case. In fact, something interesting was said by Joanna in a KCRO3 interview. Her co-author, Mike, interviewed the Zanstra family personally, and when he spoke with David Zanstra, it was noticed that his recollection of the day was fuzzy. They assumed it was due to age, but later in their investigations, they heard buzzings that David Zanstra might become a prime suspect.
Mike actually grew up knowing the Zanstra family because he lived in the same neighborhood. And he reached out and spoke to the Reverend Zanstra. He spoke to Marge, his wife, and Christy, one of his daughters. We talked to him about that day because he talked about how he had called the police that morning. And his recollection of the day was kind of fuzzy, and we chalked it up to age.
His wife, Mrs. Zanstra, said, "I do remember not sleeping at night, and it was pouring rain, and I thought this poor child is out there somewhere in the rain and cold. For years, I'd worry about my kids walking alone and not coming home for school on time and that kind of thing." Little did she know, the person responsible for inciting those fears was sleeping right in her bed. Many now question, if his little daughter said touching kids was nothing new for her dad, did Mrs. Zanstra really have no idea of the true nature of the man she was with? The book has prompted persons to look back at suppressed memories of instances where they or someone close were nearly abducted by an assailant in a vehicle, and David Zanstra is who some claim might be the suspect. Joanna Falcone Sullivan and Mike Mathis placed a lot of time and effort into delving into this cold case and bringing never-before-known details to the public domain. Do support their book by purchasing to read an in-depth breakdown of Gretchen's case, with far more insight into case files and personal accounts from persons close to the case and community. Sadly, Gretchen's father, Harold Boyd Harrington, didn't live to see the day justice would be served. At 94 years old, he peacefully passed away on November 16th, 2021, at sunrise of Drescher Senior Living Home. May him and his sweet little daughter, Gretchen Harrington, rest in peace, and the family be able to overcome the weight of the tragedy now that the murderer is on trial for taking their loved one's life. This has been an episode of Mysteries, where true stories from around the world come to life. What stories come next? Like, share, comment and subscribe to never miss what intriguing chronicles will be told.